At the end of April, AAC&U released a new vision of educational excellence entitled What Liberal Education Looks Like, founded on equity and inclusion and designed to guide higher education at this time of unparalleled transformation. It is a vision that details the ongoing dynamism and enduring relevance of liberal education in preparing students to address the most pressing issues of the day, while positioning them for success within a future none of us can fully predict. When this vision was first unveiled last January at AAC&U's 2020 annual meeting in Washington, D.C., no one could have anticipated that the world as we knew it would be upended, that COVID-19, social distancing, shelter in place, Zoom bombing, and local and national lockdowns would become part of our daily lexicon, or that a global pandemic would spur an economic recession, fueling even greater uncertainty. While colleges and universities across the country demonstrated remarkable resilience and innovation in the pivot to remote and online learning, in the process, the food and shelter insecurities experienced by so many of our students, alongside the consequences of the widening expanse of the digital divide, were magnified. Colleges and universities serving students who rely on the library for access to computers, who are in areas with no high-speed internet, and who cannot afford expensive data plans, have begun to establish digital parking lots where students can sit in their cars to take courses and exams. A reflection of the growing economic segregation in higher education, such scenes are bound to multiply as the already tenuous status of low-income students will undoubtedly be exacerbated by the financial crisis catalyzed by COVID-19. Since mid-March, when students were first being moved off residential campuses, more than 36.5 million people have filed for unemployment benefits. And while the demand for higher education traditionally increases during economic recessions, 1 in 5 high school students responding to a recent Simpson-Scarborough survey said they will likely not attend college next year because of the coronavirus. Nearly as many students, 14%, said that their plans regarding which college to attend have changed to those less expensive or closer to home. Disaggregated data reveals persistent equity gaps in higher education, with 32% of minoritized students and 22% of white students reporting that they will probably not return to college in the fall, or it's too soon to say. Overall, 64% of students of color indicated a change in college plans due to COVID-19, compared to 44% of white students. In addition, a survey by Re-Up Education shows that 4 out of 5 students say they are facing significant disruption resulting from increased financial pressures and the need to balance work and school. The greatest impact will be on those attending community colleges, institutions that have received the lowest proportion of funding under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, because the formula used to determine allocations was based on full-time equivalent enrollment rather than total headcount, and excluded undocumented students and international students. Yet 65% of community college students attend part-time and are predominantly first-generation, low-income, and non-white. Therefore, the very colleges that serve the most vulnerable students will face a new level of challenges due to policies that continue to render them under-resourced. We need to take direct aim at educational disparities and patterns of systemic disadvantage, especially those resulting from historical and contemporary effects of racism. However, making equity a pervading focus of educational reform and innovation will require colleges and universities to move beyond the goals of access and compositional diversity to conceive of and deliver educational experiences that support the success of all students. The questions for leaders of higher education at all levels and at all types of institutions are: what form should this education take? What exactly should students be expected to learn, and why? Over the past several years, calls for colleges and universities to expand narrow technical training at the expense of broad-based liberal education have been fueled by a skeptical public and loudening chorus of legislators seeking the most immediate path to employability for graduates. Already, there are reports of colleges and universities responding to the financial constraints precipitated by the decline in enrollment from COVID-19 by cutting humanities, arts, and social science programs and faculty. In contrast, AAC&U's vision for the future reaffirms a commitment to liberal education as the best means for preparing students for work, citizenship, and life while facilitating social mobility. Indeed, during this moment of global crisis, AAC&U's mission of advancing the vitality and public standing of liberal education by making equity and quality the foundations for excellence in undergraduate education in service to democracy is more critical than ever. The nature of the challenges arising from COVID-19 illustrate the reasons why. Despite the extraordinary advances that have been made in science over the centuries, appealing to technology alone is futile when it comes to grappling with the most fundamental questions of human existence, rendered unavoidable by the proliferation of COVID-19. At a time of scarce medical resources, healthcare professionals across the country have been asked to decide which patient should be given the last ventilator, to treat those who've tested positive for the virus without the availability of personal protective equipment, and determine whether to comfort patients who are dying alone due to hospital-imposed bans on visitors when they could be tending to others who are likely to survive. These complex dilemmas, unfolding within a system that has privileged individual autonomy over protecting public health, have led to a reordering of ethical principles regarding how society should allocate scarce medical resources, whether individualism can be excessive in matters of life and death, and how we can balance the values of pluralism and tolerance on the one hand against principles of fairness to all on the other. As philosopher Alain de Botton reminds us in his exquisite essay on Albert Camus' 1947 novel, The Plague, in relation to the current pandemic, the existential reality is, quote, "When it comes to dying, there is no progress in history. There is no escape from our frailty. Being alive always was and will remain an emergency." For Camus' main character, a physician in an ordinary town compelled by circumstances to fight a mysterious deadly disease, the absurdity of suffering and random loss of life can be countered only through decency, striving to lessen the suffering of others. Like de Botton, Harvard historian Gilles Lepore analyzes the underlying themes in Camus' novel applied to today's crisis. Yet she does so in the context of contagion fables, concluding that, quote, "In the literature of pestilence, the greatest threat isn't the loss of human life, but the loss of what makes us human." The perspectives offered by philosophers and historians such as de Botton and Lepore are essential as we confront the metaphysics of being human and conscious of living in the world. For no matter how much scientific expertise our medical professionals possess, the skills and knowledge necessary for confronting the types of challenges arising from COVID-19 call for the capacity to combine allusions to the past with what is happening in the world right now, to speak to a universality of experience, and to have the moral courage to exercise decency, even during the darkest of days. Moreover, individual decision-making by those on the front lines of the fight against COVID-19 in the U.S. is taking place within the context of an increasingly fractured society. Consider, for instance, the continuing debates over whether or how quickly states should reopen amidst the pandemic. Just as the media began reporting burgeoning evidence of the disparately negative impact of COVID-19 on communities of color, showcasing persistent structural inequities in healthcare, income, wealth, education, access to government resources, and incarceration, organized rallies broke out across the country, demonstrating against the stay-at-home orders mandated by states. Demonstrators in Michigan, carrying assault weapons and tactical gear, nooses, swastikas, and Confederate flags, stormed the Capitol building, demanding an end to the shutdown. In Denver, healthcare workers who took to the streets in their scrubs and masks, mobilizing silent counter-protests by blocking traffic, were threatened with violence and told to go back to China if they wanted communism. Both sites and gatherings throughout the U.S. had protesters who insisted that the coronavirus is a hoax perpetrated by those intent on destroying the economy as a means of unseating President Trump. These clashing perspectives over how much individual liberty should be sacrificed for the public good signal the fact that partisan divides in America are greater than they have been in more than a half a century. The challenges for democracies during periods of extreme polarization are detailed by Ronald Dworkin in his book, Is Democracy Possible Here? Principles for a New Political Debate. The author warns of the consequences of partisan divides reaching the point where we are no longer partners in self-government, and, quote, our politics are rather a form of war. Dworkin asserts democracy can be healthy with no serious political argument if there is nevertheless a broad consensus about what is to be done. It can be healthy even if there's no consensus, if it does have a culture of argument. But it cannot remain healthy with deep and bitter divisions and no real argument, because then it becomes only a tyranny of numbers. According to Dworkin, a true democracy requires propelling public debate, or alternatively, finding common ground even in the absence of consensus. If colleges and universities are to develop the independent and critical thinkers necessary to ensure that democracy is more than the tyranny of numbers, we must collectively reaffirm the role that a liberal education plays in discerning the truth, the ways in which it serves as a catalyst for interrogating the sources of narratives, including history, evidence, and facts, the ways in which a liberal education promotes an understanding that the world is a collection of interdependent yet inequitable systems, the ways in which it expands knowledge of human interactions, privilege, and stratification, and the ways in which higher education fosters equity and justice, locally and globally. If nothing else, the current culture wars being played out on the national stage highlight the inextricable link between a strong democracy and liberal education, an education which prepares students to be mindful of the dangers of ideological filtering, to speak across differences, and to engage in ethical decision-making, deliberation with respect to competing arguments, and sympathetic imagination, while cultivating personal and social responsibility. These skills and a disposition to civic involvement and lifelong learning cultivated by a liberal education are indispensable to the creation of a more just and inclusive society. They also offer the best means to the democratic end of universal access to opportunity at the heart of the American dream. By emphasizing engagement with big questions, liberal education nurtures a wide range of intellectual and practical skills, inquiry and analysis, critical and creative thinking, written and oral communication, teamwork and problem solving, quantitative information, scientific and technological literacies. These learning outcomes transcend the variety of institutional settings and courses of study, preparing students to contribute to and flourish within the personal, civic, and economic spheres of their lives. Evidence from AAC&U's most recent round of employer surveys, including 501 employers and 500 hiring managers, confirms that employers regard a graduate's ability to think critically, communicate clearly, solve complex problems in real-world settings within diverse groups, and act ethically as more important than their undergraduate major. Such cross-cutting skills can be developed in a wide variety of chosen disciplines if the courses are well designed and if they are integrated within robust, problem-based general education programs. In a globally interdependent multicultural world, it is precisely because employers place a premium on innovation in response to rapid change that they emphasize these student experiences rather than narrow technical training. If the learning outcomes of a liberal education correspond to the proficiencies required for engaged citizenship and for the workplace of today and tomorrow, as educators and employers agree they do, then liberal education can unleash the potential of those otherwise most likely to be excluded from full participation in civic and economic life. A general education curriculum should focus on knowledge of human cultures in the physical and natural world, intellectual and practical skills, personal and social responsibility, integrative and applied learning as necessary for all students' intellectual, civic, personal, and professional development, and for success in a global economy. Assignments should make clear the relationships among areas of knowledge, ensuring that students do not see academic disciplines as separate and disconnected silos of learning, but rather as varied approaches to the same enlightened end. Engaging students in solving real-world problems across the curriculum from their first to final semesters contests the continued primacy of now outmoded curricular designs and institutional structures, including distribution models of general education that privilege departmental structures and promote disciplinary silos. Writing for AAC&U on her book, The New Education, Ness Award winner and higher education scholar Kathy Davidson elucidates the ways in which so much of higher education today is a product of factory models designed for efficiency 150 years ago. According to Davidson, quote, "The great project of the 19th century was to train farmers to be factory workers and to turn shopkeepers into a professional managerial class. Everyone from Karl Marx to Adam Smith talked about how formal, compulsory schooling was designed to train children to time, task, duty, hierarchy, and authority. This is one reason the school bell became the century's symbol of public education." Davidson notes that as the modern American research university arose between 1860 and 1925, quote, "A range of systems and structures for regularizing, specializing, and measuring learning became fully institutionalized, including majors, minors, electives, graduate and professional schools, degree requirements, credit hours, grades, multiple choice tests, college entrance exams, tenure, sabbaticals, faculty pensions, school rankings, donor-named chairs, corporate-sponsored research, failure, and more. Acknowledging the extent to which our majors and minors are designed to replicate the specialized training of the professoriate, as opposed to responding to the needs of the contemporary world, Davidson seeks a new Copernican revolution in the way we think about the purpose of higher education, one that will disrupt the current systems and structures no longer serving the needs of 21st century students. In addition to breaking down the barriers impeding integrative, problem-based learning that addresses real-world problems, this revolution must also include a transition away from the expert model in which students are passive recipients of knowledge, to one in which liberal learners actively engage with knowledge, participating in its creation and expansion. A focus on inclusive excellence empowers liberal learners to appropriate the knowledge and skills represented by essential learning outcomes to make them their own. This, in turn, requires embracing a paradigm shift from ranking and sorting students to ensuring that all students benefit from the most powerful forms of learning. Student success depends not on the college readiness of individual students, but rather on the readiness of the institution to welcome and support all students and respond to the changing needs of an increasingly diverse society. Reconceived as a process rather than an outcome, excellence in higher education entails providing students with regular opportunities to demonstrate achievement in a range of knowledge and skills areas across their educational experiences and pathways, and assessed in ways that promote continuous improvement. For far too long, educators have relied on assessments that ask students questions for which we already know the answers. Preparing students for the unscripted problems of the future will require jettisoning standardized tests and developing more equitable forms of assessment. There's been some progress toward this end emerging as a result of the impact of COVID-19 on higher education. The need for social distancing to prevent the spread of the coronavirus caused SAT and ACT testing centers to shut down. This led to a flurry of top-ranked national liberal arts colleges and universities, including Harvard and Cornell, waiving their standardized test requirements for the fall of 2021 and beyond. The College Board's announcement that they were developing an online test which students could take at home raised an outcry over issues of equity. These compounded existing concerns over issues of discrimination based on race, class, gender, and disability status related to the testing. In fact, increased attention to the lack of availability of expensive test preparation, stereotype threat, which raises self-doubt and increases anxiety for those who are negatively stereotyped, and the myth of meritocracy revealed by the Varsity Blues scandal, in which wealthy parents paid to have their children's test scores changed, issued forth a lawsuit against the University of California system. The plaintiffs called for the elimination of the SAT or ACT requirement, claiming that the tests are biased and not accurate predictors of academic success. The trend toward more equitable assessment in the admission process and throughout a student's education carries potential for contributing positively to the completion rates of low-income students, especially at elite institutions, and to their social mobility. Quality assessment entails the evaluation of applied learning experiences centered on student agency. Assignments should be transparent, making clear the learning objectives, and be scaffolded in a way that moves toward engaging students in increasingly complex work. Rather than standardized tests, the most promising assessment approach evaluate samples of authentic student work using scoring guides or rubrics that are keyed to essential learning outcomes. Rubric-based assessment across diverse learning pathways provides a window on the development and application of skills over time, as opposed to how a student performs on a single exam or assignment. The best evidence of student gains in proficiency is found not in the results of standardized tests, but rather in the actual work they produce across their diverse learning pathways. The most promising assessment approach evaluates samples of authentic student work using scoring guides or rubrics. Assessment of liberal education at its best is grounded in a demonstration of proficiencies regarding complex, interrelated problems that draw upon multiple disciplinary and experiential lenses, while evaluating dimensions of students' formation as global citizens and problem solvers. The embrace of inclusive excellence as a process has evolved from and built upon the earlier shift from instruction to learning, and focuses on faculty-driven innovation related to active and applied forms of problem-centered, inquiry-based learning, and the exploration of a significant problem that is defined personally by each student. This type of signature work centers on student initiatives, interests, and insights, encompassing cumulative learning and high-impact practices. E-portfolios offer a tool for helping students make sense of their cumulative experience, making it possible to see and to demonstrate to others that their liberal education is worth more than the sum of its parts. Their use allows us to account for the fact that learning is not confined to the classroom, but it occurs within and across a range of curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular experiences. Promoting reflection on assignments through e-portfolios facilitates meaning-making in ways that help students monitor individual progress, understand why they are being asked to do what the curriculum requires of them, and apply their learning in other contexts and settings. In addition, it contributes to the creation of a powerful personal narrative by which students connect their curriculum to their career goals. Finally, assessment practices that emphasize the learning process and outcomes can reduce stress for students who are worried about failing or who lack the social and cultural capital needed to understand that they deserve a place in the academy. If we are to fulfill the promise of American higher education and ensure that all students are benefiting from the educational practices that support student success, colleges and universities must be places of welcome and belonging. C. Sheldon's compelling research highlights how stress from economic securities, racism, and a lack of a sense of belonging reduce the amount of cognitive bandwidth available for learning. The devastating impact of COVID-19 will add further stress for many students in the coming semester, whether they are on campus or learning remotely. Faculty, staff, and administrators must do everything possible to enhance a sense of belonging and inclusion and encourage a growth mindset in students by offering opportunities for continuous improvement that can promote intellectual risk-taking. Belonging uncertainty among underserved students can also be reduced when colleges and universities make a commitment to serving as anchor institutions, demonstrating that their success is intertwined with the economic, educational, health, and psychosocial well-being of those in the communities in which they're located. Active engagement with diverse individuals around real-world challenges, taking advantage of local epistemologies, can create pathways for students and establish an enhanced sense of belonging crucial to individual thriving. Therefore, the vision of liberal education promoted by AAC&U requires a renewed and reinvigorated commitment to civic and democratic purposes of higher education. If higher education is to emerge strengthened by the ongoing crisis touched off by COVID-19, we must intentionally prioritize quality, equity, and inclusion in any of the possible futures ahead of us. Our ability to fulfill the promises we have made to our students and to fulfill the broad democratic purposes of American higher education will depend on whether we hold fast to these shared values. At this moment of unprecedented disruption, there is opportunity to reimagine and revolutionize higher education. We look forward to working together toward our shared objectives and to supporting you in meeting the needs of your individual institutions.